Good afternoon. Welcome to the New York edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040, Choosing an Abundant Future. Let me run through some quick logistics before we get started, and here you can see what our agenda is for our hour together. Everyone's been muted, no need to worry about the barking dogs or any other background noise on your end. If you would like to ask a question, we will be leaving time at the end for questions or comments. Feel free to send us a question. To do that, look at your control screen, your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. At the very top is an orange arrow. If you click on that, that minimizes the panel. If you click on it again, it brings it back out. In the panel, you see a tab that says questions. If you want to write a question, click on that little box on the far right-hand side that has a little arrow sticking out of it. That pops the whole thing out, and you can simply put your question in there and send it, and we will ask it at the end. Note, too, in the same control panel, there's a handout section. If you click on that, it will take you to a link to the full report as well as to a 2-page New York summary, which we're going to talk through a little bit later on. Lastly, on the control panel, if when we get to the website and we're looking at the maps, the control panel is in the way, again, click on the little orange arrow at the top and it shrinks the control panel so you can see better. We are recording this webinar. We will send a link of the recording to everybody who has registered. Please feel free to share that with anybody you think might be interested. So with that, let me introduce myself and my co-host. I am Chris Coffin. I direct American Farmland Trust National Agricultural Land Network. We are an information and peer learning network that was created a couple of years ago in response to our Farms Under Threat State of the States report. It is a professional network designed for anybody interested in trying to save farm and ranch land. It's national, it is free. We are trying to build the capacity of more folks to do more to reduce conversion of agricultural land and to increase protection. So if you're interested, you want to be connected with other people around the country, please feel free to join. Let me now, I should also say that I'm AFT's Senior Policy Advisor. I specialize in farmland protection, land access and farm transfer, and farm viability. So with me today, my co-host is Linda Garrett, who is AFT's relatively new New York and New Jersey Regional Director. It's great to have her now at AFT. She was the Executive Director for a regional land trust in upstate New York, Tug Hill Tomorrow. For 30 years, Linda worked to protect over 20,000 acres of working farms and forests. And in her new role, she will be able to have greater impact statewide on farmland conservation and farm viability. So great to have you with us, Linda. Also joining us is Ethan Winter. Ethan is American Farmland Trust's new Northeast Solar Specialist, and he is listening in and here to answer any questions about solar that folks might have at the end of the session. So thank you, Ethan. We are also joined by Paul Byer, and let's make sure that Paul can hear us and we can hear him. Paul, are you there?
He just needs to unmute.
How about try unmuting Paul?
He's trying to join by phone. I would keep going and then.
Okay, well, we're going to hope that Paul can join us and that we can hear him. So, Paul, we will come back to you later on and hope that you can join us then. So let's keep going. Let me say just a little bit about American Farmland Trust for those who do not know much about us. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We are the only national agricultural land trust, and we do direct land projects. Some folks know us best by our bumper sticker, No Farms, No Food, but the prior bumper sticker to that said it's not farmland without farmers. We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and our regional programs focus not just on protecting the agricultural land base, but on the practices being used on the land and on the farmers and ranchers who are working the land, both those on it now and those who aspire to be on the land in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy, and we work from farm fields and kitchen tables to the halls of state capitals and Congress. We have 6 regional offices, and our national office is in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Linda.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you everybody for joining us. We'd like to take a moment to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is American Farmland Trust's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been invaluable to this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Great, thank you, Linda. So a note to Paul, we will come back to you later on in the hour and hope that you can join us then. In the meantime, though, the 3 of us are going to go off our cameras and we are going to jump right into the methodology and findings for the report so that people can see it on the full screen. So the first 2 Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, which we released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land. We first looked at conversion from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we're looking forward. We're using past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the States data and analysis, again from 2001 to 2016. And that analysis mapped conversion of land to 2 different types, urban and highly developed, high density development, and low density residential development. So let's take a minute to look at, again, at what those 2 types of conversion patterns we mean when we're talking about this. Urban and highly developed land is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion. It's been mapped and tracked for many years. It includes residential and commercial and industrial development, typically around cities and towns. However, it also includes rural industrial sites, such as oil and gas development and solar infrastructure. Anything essentially that can be identified by satellite remote sensing is built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit in farmland conversion, and AFT worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the agricultural land base. So this type of development ranges from lower density subdivisions to larger, what we call farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms that remain. It's important to note here, though, that some agriculture can be found on low density residential land. Smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban areas, can also be highly productive and quite sustainable and profitable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low density residential development, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and high density land. So, starting with our historical data, we projected into the future with the business as usual scenario. Basically, we made a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as what we documented in State of the States to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or decline. Building off that business as usual scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll talk about in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. And once we had the projections of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios. And we did this looking both at the agricultural land type, so what's most likely to be converted in a particular state or county? Is it cropland, pasture land, rangeland? And we looked at the quality of the land that is projected for conversion using our productivity, versatility, and resiliency index that we'll talk about in a little bit. As with every modeling exercise, there are some caveats. The big one, as you can see here, is that we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local. There's no national database of them. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and the rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those historic conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impacts of water scarcity and the potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or salinization. Mapping this impact is very complex with a lot of variables and was simply beyond the scope of this analysis. You'll see in the website when we get there that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual. Again, that is the straight line projection using that 2001 to 2016 data as the basis for it. The second scenario is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, driven by high housing costs in more urban areas and more work opportunities that are remote and which may only be improved as rural broadband expands. Some parts of the country, we think, are already on this trajectory. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on productive agricultural land. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some agricultural land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So let's look quickly at the assumptions that went into these scenarios. So again, the business as usual, you see here the historic rate of conversion for both high density urban development and low density residential. We adjusted that the urban and high density conversion rate for population growth because we know there's a strong corollary between a population increase and the rate of that urban conversion. In runaway sprawl, we left the same rate of urban and high density conversion on the assumption that most of that sprawl was going to be of the low density residential type. And there we assumed just a 50% higher rate of conversion. In the better built cities scenario, conversely, we assumed that that rate of urban and high density conversion would be reduced by 25%. And we know that that is a realistic reduction in the rate of conversion because there are some cities that have done that. On the rate of low density residential conversion, we were more ambitious, assuming that in fact, again, because there's less population involved, that it could be a 50% reduction from what has been the business as usual. So now that we know what those assumptions are, let's look at each scenario's potential impact. This gray on the left is the 11 million acres that we mapped as being converted from 2001 to 2016. And here you see that under the business as usual or worse runaway sprawl, we could see a total national conversion of farm and ranch land from anywhere from 18.4 million to 24.4 million acres. Conversely, if we are able to shrink our footprint on productive ag land, we could reduce that threat of conversion to 11 million acres. You may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is it really the best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options especially is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, and we hope they can be, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how New York compares to other states. This slide shows the projected total acres converted by county. You see that in fact there's quite a bit of rust colored in New York, but obviously some of the biggest and darkest, meaning most acres converted, are in the Southwest given the size and scale of agriculture. This next slide compares the percent of agricultural land in each county that is projected to be developed. And again, you see quite a bit of darker colored rust in New York and much more on the East Coast, given that the size of agriculture is, the amount of ag land as a percent of all land is a little bit less in the East. Another key finding relates to the impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of land, or what we called PVR values. Land over a certain PVR threshold is land that we consider to be nationally significant, land which is best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. And you can see that there's quite a bit of it in New York State. What we find in our future projections is that conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of all agricultural land generally. Likely because for the same reason it's highly productive agricultural land, it's flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks, it makes it easily developed. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion between 2016 and 2040 will occur on this nationally significant land, even though this land represents less than 40% of the country's agricultural land base. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to all fruit, nut, and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Linda to talk through the next two slides.
Great, thanks, Chris. One of the other threats we're highlighting with this report is the threat that solar development poses on agricultural land. To be clear, American Farmland Trust supports renewable energy development. However, we think it's essential that we plan carefully so that our most productive, versatile, and resilient land is not compromised. We also think it's possible for agriculture and solar to coexist in mutually beneficial ways. This map shows the projected acres of utility-scale solar photovoltaics energy generation facilities by state in 2040. This data comes from the decarbonization with electrification scenario of the U.S. Department of Energy's Solar Futures study. That study estimates there will need to be 7.4 million acres of utility-scale solar in place by 2040 to meet the Biden administration's energy goal. This next map shows the percent of undeveloped land projected to be used for solar development based on that same DOE Solar Futures study. We did model conversion of land to solar development, but did not include that data layer in this report because of issues with the data. There is some information about the solar modeling results in our solar technical paper that is available through the Farmland Information Center. We will also be releasing a solar white paper later this year. The most important findings, however, were that 83% of the projected solar development by 2040 will be sited on agricultural land, and nearly half of the projected solar will be sited on nationally significant land. We're now going to dive into the data available for New York on the interactive website. And for this, we're going to be joined by our colleague, Beth Frazier, who will be our navigator. Thank you, Beth.
Great. Thanks so much, Linda, and thank you, Beth. So right now we are going to dive into the website, and when you get there, and Beth will put a link to the website in the chat, when you get there initially, you see this cover page. Talks a little bit about what we did, what the 3 scenarios were, summary of some of the top line findings. To get out of this, you can just click the X at the upper right there. That takes you out of it. Let's talk about now what you see up in this upper right hand corner of your screen, because these tabs are useful to know about. That about takes you right back to that cover little memo at the top. Next to the about, you see a how-to tab. That takes you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. The View Report tab takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where you can find the full report, the executive summary, the solar technical report, as well as some of these other things, including our prior report, the Farms Under Threat State of the State report. And we are making the geospatial data layers available to anybody interested in them. If you would like them, that Request Data tab up there in the right-hand corner is the place to learn more and to make that request. And it takes you to that form that Beth was just showing us. So now Beth is going to take us into New York, and all you do is you click on New York, and when you do that, the page will automatically populate. Down here on the left is the statewide data, and on the right is the data for whatever county your cursor happened to be on when you clicked in the map. So let's talk a minute about what you see here on this page and what this page can tell you. You see here first the top line findings from the 3 different scenarios, that basically New York is projected to lose 452,000 acres under that business as usual scenario. If you look a little bit closer, you can see that it's distinguished between the urban and highly developed and the low density residential here. And for New York as a whole, that you can see in any of the scenarios that it's the low density residential development that is driving likely conversion on into the future. When you look over at Saratoga County, you see a slightly different story. Again, you see quite a bit of conversion, but a greater percent of that conversion is that urban and high density conversion. There's still a lot of low density residential development, but as a percent, it's a little bit less. But again, for the first time, we are providing county level data, which we hope will be very useful to folks who are interested in trying to minimize conversion of farmland. Looking down, let's show you what else you can see here on this page. As I was talking about the sort of what is the impact on New York's best agricultural land, or that land that has the higher PVR values, again, you can see that under business as usual, that 268,700 acres of that projected conversion would be to New York's higher quality, more productive land. And again, you can see the numbers for Saratoga County, and you can see the numbers for Runaway Sprawl. Looking down below, what is the likely impact and what type of land of that 452,000 acres that's likely to be converted? What is that made up of? Here you see that cropland is the largest land type that is likely to be lost with 218,000 acres, pasture land at 132. And a note about this woodland, what it shows is 100,000 plus acres. This is obviously not all forest land in New York State. What it is in the 2020 Farms Under Threat report, we were able to map woodland associated with a farm. And so this number represents the numbers of acres of woodland that are attached as part of a farm and the likely conversion of that land as other associated cropland and pasture land as lost with it. And the last point on this screen to point out is again what we were talking at the outset, that low density residential development paves the way for further development. You can see here that in New York State, land that was in low density residential land use in 2016 is 8 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2040. We can talk a little bit more about that later. So going back up, what we want to do is just show you quickly the downloadable report for New York. If you click on that little blue tab, what we have here is, we hope, a very easily printed, easily downloaded, shared graphic and helpful information that we hope that folks will share with policymakers, with membership, with donors, with anyone who might have an interest in trying to reduce the conversion of farmland. Here again, you see that 452,000 acre number, but what we've done in these summaries is to translate what that projected loss will be to the loss in terms of farms and farm output and jobs. And here you see it's the equivalent of losing 2,500 farms, 288 million in farm output, and over 7,000 jobs associated with the agricultural sector in New York. Again, 63% of the conversion is likely to occur on New York's nationally significant agricultural land. And here you see that what we project are the counties that are the hardest hit with the most conversion are Orange, St. Lawrence, and Saratoga. If you go down, you see a little bit more information. Again, we hope all of this is useful. But with that, I'm now going to turn it back to Linda, and she and Beth are going to take us into a more intensive cruise of a few of New York's counties.
Thanks for that overview, Chris. So we're going to show you how you can compare some different scenarios from the modeling work. Let's stay right here, Beth, at Saratoga. On the left map, there's a drop-down menu, and let's choose the runaway sprawl scenario. Great. Now on the right-hand side, let's do the same, except that choose better built cities. All right, excellent. So as you can see, also I wanted to show you really quick that you can highlight the different backgrounds that you can select on the top right. So you can choose between standard, satellite, or the 2016 land cover, and those all kind of give you a better understanding of what you're looking at, better views of what you're looking at, depending on what you prefer. Looking at these two maps side by side, you can clearly see that the modeling predicts a significant amount of low-density residential development along major travel corridors and spreading out from the population centers. And those are those orange, you can see the orange colored, which is mostly low density residential. Now going a little bit to the west, we're going to check out another county. We're going to go to Genesee County. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to see the two scenarios side by side. And again, as you would expect, moving out from those population areas and along the travel corridors is where the greatest impact will be. You know, this is just a predictive model, and what we choose to do can change the outcome. So have fun poking around on this interactive map. I did. And now back to you, Chris.
Great. Thank you, Linda. So now that we've talked about the findings, we want to take a few minutes to talk about actions. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? And we hope that I'm going to talk through this next slide. I'm going to turn it back over to Linda, and we hope at that point that we will now have Paul, who will be able to join us and we'll be able to hear him. But hang on, Paul, we're going to get to you in just a minute. So the report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. So if you are a county or a municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, a congressional staffer, we hope you will find a recommendation in here that you'd like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in the report. And if you are a farmer, a landowner, a community advocate, work for a farm or a conservation organization, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. So let me highlight just a few things that we discuss in the recommendations at a high level. Encouraging smart growth. Smart growth and compact development require a foundation of good local planning. Comprehensive plans are where the rubber meets the road in laying the foundation for land use regulations that promote compact development and minimize development of a community's best farmland. We encourage communities to engage in comprehensive planning. We encourage people to engage in the comprehensive planning process, and we encourage states to support comprehensive planning at the local level. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year, and an important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which can complement the New York State Farmland Protection Program and additionally fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers. More funding for that program would help protect more farmland in New York. Advance smart solar siting. I'm going to skip over that because Linda is going to talk to that further in a minute. And supporting farmland access. Kudos to New York State, which was one of the first states to develop a Farm Link program. We think New York's model of providing technical assistance through service providers to senior farmers, farmland owners, and farm seekers is a good one, and one we hope other states might emulate. And now Linda is going to talk with Paul Beyer about smart growth and more about what AFT is doing to address agricultural land conversion in New York.
Thanks, Chris. Paul, can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear and see. Can you hear me?
Excellent. Yes. Thank you, Paul. So I'm going to really quickly introduce Paul. He's the State Director of Smart Growth Planning at New York State Department of State. And in this position, Paul promotes the principles of smart growth on the state, regional, and local level in New York. His experience in land use and smart growth began when he worked in the New York State Legislature, where he focused on land use, environmental and public health policy. Paul served on the planning board in the town of Amherst and the Comprehensive Plan Advisory Committee in the town of Bethlehem, New York, where he had helped develop both towns' comprehensive plans. Paul also served on the board of directors of Partners for a Livable Western New York, the premier smart growth advocacy group in the Buffalo Niagara region. Paul has a law degree from the University at Buffalo. And so Paul, thanks again for joining us, and I'm glad we can hear you and you can hear us. So as you heard, smart growth is the basis of our Better Built Cities scenario. In our conversations prepping for this webinar, you mentioned that you just went through a comprehensive planning process with the town of Bethlehem. Can you tell us a little bit about how municipalities can help protect farmland through comprehensive planning and some of the programs that New York has to support municipalities in implementing smart growth principles?
Sure. The fundamental principles of smart growth are twofold and very simple. When a community goes through its planning and zoning process, they should start by thinking about where they want to grow, particularly where they want to densify. And of course, under the smart growth formula, that would be in our town squares, town centers, traditional central business districts, what we know as downtowns. And the second analysis is where do we not want to grow? And then where do we want to preserve there or build lightly, develop low density? There are many definitions to smart growth, but that's the basic formula that we should start with. And the interesting thing to me throughout this smart growth movement, it's almost 30 years old now, is that I have heard from rural communities that smart growth is for suburban communities to fight sprawl. And that's true. Smart growth is for the cities. We neglected our cities. We've got to invest in them. That's true too. We're through 5 rounds of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative, and we know that cities have been neglected, and we need to front load them with resources and assistance. But really, the smart growth formula has survived intact, mostly in the rural communities. Now, the downtowns there, the small hamlets, may need vibrancy. They may suffer from vacancy, under-resourced, underutilized. But the basic formula is there. Focus on your middle, your centers, and preserve your periphery, farmland, agrarian character. So there are 2 programs, I think, that are significant here. First is the Smart Growth Grant Program, which provides funding for comprehensive planning and zoning according to the principles of smart growth. That's the first place to start. Once you have a comp plan that buys into this smart growth formula, then your zoning and your other land use policies and infrastructure decisions can flow from that. So as Linda just mentioned, I just went through that process as a volunteer in my town, partly to remind myself of how that process unfolds and really how difficult and challenging it could be with all the competing interests, including the farm community, farmland community on the periphery, and what I was referred to during the process in Bethlehem as the town folk, the people who live in the center. But the comp plan process is set up to bring those two and many other parties together and agree on where they want to grow, where they don't want to grow. And that's why I think this planning and zoning assistance program is so important. You can't get anywhere unless you have buy-in from the localities, of course, because zoning and preservation decisions take place on the local level. So there's that component, and we need to get smart growth into as many comp plans and zoning ordinances as possible. It's a great tool to assist you in your development and preservation decisions. But as I mentioned earlier, really the first line of analysis is find your centers and redevelop them in whatever way you can. Attract attention, business, residents, improve your infrastructure in your municipal centers. As I mentioned, we've gone through 5 rounds of the Downtown Revitalization Initiative. 59 communities have gotten $10 million grants. We see revitalization, reinvigoration, resurgence throughout the state. However, the governor noticed that there was a missing piece. There were some smaller and rural communities, ones that may be understaffed and under-resourced, that may not have participated in that program because of its magnitude. It takes a lot of time and effort and staff resources to manage a $10 million grant. So the governor just announced what is known as New York Forward, and it's focused on smaller and rural communities. Those are the ones where we can really focus the smart growth formula on. And it may be just a very small downtown, a downtown that maybe comprises 1 or 2 blocks. However, they are just as important in the smart growth formula as the Buffalo, Syracuses, and Rochesters to those communities. They're additionally important because in rural areas, I think we make it easier when we invest our resources in the centers, which then encourages farmland protection, open space preservation, on the periphery, again, to maintain that agrarian pastoral character that characterizes our rural areas and our rural communities. So we're going to invest heavily in those downtowns, in those rural areas. This program, it has some new and innovative components to it, and I think they're particularly helpful to the rural communities. We simply we encourage applicants to submit a simple, brief letter of intent to apply. Give us your vision. Once you do that, we will assign a consultant to work one-on-one with you to develop a full application. So there you have assistance from paid consultants in developing and drafting your application. We're also providing educational webinars just so people go into this program knowing all the pieces, in effect, what the road is ahead when you choose to apply for a program like this. And throughout the process, even when we select the winners, we will offer even more technical assistance to help you through the project implementation process, which can be arduous and challenging. So those two programs, I think, hit on the major ways that New York State can help. Fund planning and zoning that incorporates smart growth, which of course includes farmland sensibilities and preservation, but also at the same time invest in your centers. And there's $100 million available this year just for the New York Forward program to help you do that. And I think that'll go a long way towards the scenario that you're looking for, the smart growth scenario, and away from what you call this runaway sprawl scenario.
Great. Thanks so much, Paul. I really appreciate you joining us. And this is great news to hear for New York and for having the choice of Built Better City. In addition, you can find many resources on planning for agriculture on our Farmland Information Center website, and we hope that you'll check those out as well. I'm going to spend just a few minutes here talking about what AFT is doing in New York. New York has put AFT's holistic mission of protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and keeping farmers on the land to work every day. The 4 categories listed here all work together, and I will talk about each of them in just a minute. But to emphasize, right now we are facing a generational transition of farmland, which provides an opportunity to consider the future of that land. Farmland protection can make it more affordable and forever available. There is also a growing interest from farmers wanting to incorporate sustainability in their farm plans by supporting climate resilient farming practices and exploring how solar can be sited smartly, supporting the farm viability and not taking the best farmland out of production. I want to take a minute just right now to thank all of our partners who helped make this work happen and many who are on this webinar today. So for farmland protection, New York State has a very well established farmland protection program and has just reached the milestone of 100,000 acres of farmland protected. But as we've seen in all of these scenarios, it isn't enough. We're still losing farmland at an alarming rate in New York State. New York State, local governments, and land trusts need to continue to work together to find creative ways to increase the pace of farmland protection. As Chris said, I'm going to talk a little bit about advancing smart solar siting here. Solar could have a significant impact on farmland in New York, depending on how developers choose to site projects to meet the state's ambitious climate and energy targets, as mandated in the Climate Leadership and Community Preservation Act of 2019. AFT has been deeply engaged in smart solar siting in New York, arguably more than in any other state, thanks to our state policy work. We are actively involved in NYSERDA's Agricultural Technical Working Group, which is developing a smart solar scorecard for large scale solar projects. And we're also an advisor to the Interagency Farmland Protection Working Group, which is developing recommendations for smart solar siting, farmland mitigation requirements, and dual-use agrovoltaics. Earlier this year, AFT released a smart solar report, Achieving Climate Goals While Strengthening the Future of Farming in New York. We appreciate the input and guidance that a number of people on today's webinar provided as part of this project, which was funded by the New York State Conservation Partnership Program administered by the Land Trust Alliance. I also want to recognize Ethan Winter, AFT's Northeast Solar Specialist, who co-authored the report and is here today to address any of our solar-related questions that may come up. We will provide a link to the report in the chat, and it's also located on the Farmland Information Center. Supporting farmland access. Farmland for a New Generation New York is a program coordinated by American Farmland Trust in partnership with the state of New York, agricultural organizations, land trusts, and others that help farmers seeking land and landowners wanting to help to keep their land in farming. The program offers a statewide resource center and is supported by a network of regional navigators, partner organizations with dedicated staff who can provide information and personal assistance to farmers and landowners across New York. The program recently celebrated its 100,000 matches. And then lastly, promoting sound farming practices. New York is also leading with research on the use of cover crops to improve soil health, water quality, and carbon sequestration through the Genesee River Demonstration Farms Network. The program highlights the impacts of practical and innovative conservation practices on farm viability, water quality, and other natural resources demonstrated on real working farms. So there's a lot of things that we're doing here in New York. We've just heard about a lot of opportunities for some smart growth options in New York. And we're going to stop here now and take a few questions.
Great. Thank you so much. Let us all turn our webcams back on. And we do, except for Paul, who I think is not able to do that, but we can still hear him. So Paul, actually, I'm gonna take the prerogative.
He's gone.
Oh, he's gone. I'm sorry, he's no longer on the phone. Okay, well, then I won't ask him the question I was going to ask. But so let's go on. And I want to offer a comment that was offered by David Boehm with New York Department of Ag and Markets to just remind folks that Ag and Markets offers planning grants to counties and municipalities to enable them to plan for agriculture. So thank you, David, for reminding us of that. That's very important and very helpful to have that kind of planning assistance. And I think that combination of that with New York Forward is going to mean a significant amount of planning support for rural communities. So there was a question both for Ethan and Linda. Can you talk about a little about the major findings in the solar report?
Ethan, I'll let you take that.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Our report was a deep dive that was built on a farmer survey, and we interviewed through SurveyMonkey several hundred farmers and local municipalities and others. And we got a very strong signal from the agricultural community about their concerns and interests around solar. And that's summarized in the report. We had a number of roundtables as well, including with developers to better understand the industry perspective. And in our recommendations, we highlighted the importance of building greater awareness with policymakers and with the industry about the importance of New York's farmland as the state accelerates the deployment of solar. And one thing that I just will highlight is that in the next 5 years, New York is expected to see a more than doubling of its installed solar capacity, according to the Solar Energy Industry Association. And right now, about 80% of that solar development is happening on farmland. And so that is a precursor of what's more to come as the state looks to implement its ambitious goals under the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. Among the other recommendations in our report coming from our roundtables and our survey were a recommendation to really add some teeth to the state's farmland mitigation program. So it would be a stronger way to deter development on the most productive land in New York. And earlier we noted Genesee County. Just last week, the state approved the largest project in the eastern US, a 500 megawatt solar project that's primarily on active and highly productive agricultural land in Genesee County. That's an example of the kinds of projects that are coming and the kinds of projects we want to improve through smart solar design and soil health practices. And lastly, we have been encouraging research and incentives around dual use solar, also known as agrivoltaics, to support farm viability and to ensure that solar and agriculture can coexist. We're excited about the potential to see this in practice, and it's going to take a fair amount of coordination between the agencies, including NYSERDA, and with the developer community to really see what we can accomplish with this. Those are some of the key highlights I wanted to mention, Chris.
Great, thank you. Linda, anything to add from your perspective?
I think Ethan has covered it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have a couple of related solar questions. There's somebody who asked about the Smart Solar Scorecard. Unless, did I hear you? Maybe I missed it. Is there a New York Smart Solar Scorecard coming? Because there's not a national scorecard coming.
Correct. In New York, NYSERDA is developing an updated version of the Smart Solar Scorecard, which would be used as a way to evaluate large-scale solar and the solicitations that happen annually for projects that are going to be developed and put into the transmission grid. And so these are for large projects, not community solar. And NYSERDA has been inviting a group of folks, including AFT, to advise on that scorecard. There was just a comment period that ended recently for developer responses to that scorecard. I'd be happy to put some information on that, but it's still a work in progress. And our hope is that it will be a stronger signal to developers to think about farmland impact and co-utilization early on in their project design as they're looking to win bids with the state for those projects.
Great, thank you. Now I understand more. I appreciate that. Here's a comment. Hang on, let me get to it. Any comment on farms with conservation easements, giving those up in favor of solar farms? And I will start and then turn it to Linda and Ethan. It's one cannot simply give up a conservation easement in favor of a solar farm. Conservation easements are intended to be permanent. Terminating those easements are very difficult to do. So I think one of the questions is there's sort of two pieces of it, which is solar allowed at all on protected farms? And to that, I would defer to Linda and Ethan in terms of how New York State handles that opportunity for solar development on protected farms, particularly when it's for on-farm energy production.
Sure, I can answer, I think, most of that. And it really depends on the way the easement is written, whether or not solar is allowed. If you are part of an easement that was purchased through the state Farmland Protection program, there is a provision that allows for small solar to be developed. 2% of the farm can be developed as renewable. So there is some provision for that, but not large scale. And it really even doesn't, for most farms, fit the community level solar. But to use for on-farm use, that would be appropriate. And then land trusts also work, with outside of that farmland protection program to do conservation easements on farmland, and depending on what they've agreed on, would determine whether or not solar was allowed. I think moving forward into the future, there might be some conversations and some thought about trying to figure out a way to, as Ethan was talking about, of providing dual use, if there was a dual use solar project, that maybe that would be acceptable in a conservation easement farmland protection plan. So we really need to start thinking about that, because we are, running out of places to put, or having solar and also protecting farmland. We're going to end up, we're seeing that that's, really not a good, when farmers are presented with the option of protecting their land or putting solar on, sometimes the economics of it kind of goes towards the solar rather than the protection. And so I think we need to start thinking creatively about ways that we can do both.
Great,
Yeah,
thank
well
you.
said.
Anything, Ethan, you want to add to that?
Just that's an area of active research and analysis within AFT, and continuing to think about what is the right way to flex these state farmland programs over time, so that we're not losing out on the opportunities to protect farmland if there's an opportunity to put robust dual use in place. And that's a big if. That's a question that will be further informed with research and demonstration projects, and AFT is involved in a number of those efforts in New York and across the country.
Great, thank you. There are two last questions that I want to get to right quick. One is about, how does New York State compare to other states in the Northeast and nationally in terms of projected farmland loss? And I have taken a minute to look through the tables which are in the full report. Essentially, if you look at it in terms of acres, in terms of percent of agricultural land base, the projections that we show is that New York would lose about 5% of its agricultural land base. When I look at the statistics for its neighbors, so Connecticut is, much smaller amount of land and a larger percent at over 15% of its agricultural base that would be converted. Massachusetts at nearly 15%, New Jersey at 16%, and Pennsylvania at 6%. So New York, in the greater scheme of things, and maybe this is reflective of doing some work on planning, is a little bit lower than some of its neighbors, which is a great thing. But that doesn't mean that we can take our foot off the gas, as it were, in terms of trying to do more to reduce the footprint of agricultural land conversion. With that, actually, I see that we are almost at time. So what I'm going to say is we do have a couple of other questions. Those questions we will answer when we will find a way to answer either directly to the person who posed the question or to the group when we send the recording back out in an email. But with that, let me just go to the couple of resources we have on this final slide. And obviously, for those of you who work in New York State, you know that our New York State office is got lots of resources and works throughout the state, and they are wonderful resources in and of themselves. In addition to the New York State office, we also have the Farmland Information Center, which is a wonderful place if you were looking for technical resources, data around either New York or nationally or regionally, both around farmland protection, around policy, around soil health, you name it. And that phone number is an answering service. They do answer it, so feel free to pick up the phone if you have questions. And then again, just a shameless plug for the National Agricultural Land Network. We hope that folks will join. Again, it is free, and we think that it will be a great resource and a way for people to learn more about what folks are doing around the country. So with that, I want to thank you, Linda. I want to thank Ethan. I want to thank Paul, and let me turn it over to Linda for the final word here in our webinar.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time this afternoon to join us, and I hope that you've learned a little bit about AFT and our work and the farms choosing an abundant future, and have a great day.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.